Hello and welcome to Candesic in Conversation. Simon Turton, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you again, CEO and co-founder of Gensmile Dental.
Yes.
Give us the short précis of who you are, what Gensmile does, and where you are.
Personally, my own background, I started as a healthcare professional as a pharmacist, did a PhD, worked in the pharmaceutical industry, spent 10 years working in venture capital and private equity. And then back in 2014, myself and Nick Lowcock, a colleague also from private equity, decided to look at the dental market in the UK. I'd looked at other markets in continental Europe when I've been working as an institutional investor. But this was to do something on our own with our own money. And when we looked at the market in the UK, I think somewhat to our chagrin, we realised there was a large untapped opportunity, particularly in private dentistry. So since 2014, when we had that epiphany, we've now built what I think is one of the leading private groups in the UK with about 40 clinics. And also we've combined that with an Irish group that we built in parallel that has 37 clinics. And in tandem with that, we have a small group of dental laboratories as well. So in total, we've got about 80 sites across the UK and Ireland.
So you spotted an opportunity, but the UK dental market is still fairly fragmented, isn't it?
It is. It's probably only something like 30% consolidated today out of 12,000 sites in the UK. Although that possibly gives a slightly misleading picture in that what we as consolidators are looking for are those that have sufficient unit economics that they can have a managed model to run them. So they need to be above a certain size. For us, that would be something that on a standalone basis would have a site level profitability of about £250,000. Below that, we don't really feel that it stands up to that managed model where we have a permanent manager on site and a contribution to our central costs. But still, compared to a lot of other markets, that's unconsolidated and lots of opportunity still to go.
Any other criteria for successful acquisition? Or to put it another way, what else is on your shopping list?
So when we're looking at a practice, we look at a number of criteria. Obviously for us, we're predominantly looking at those that are majority, if not entirely, private self-pay or plan-based. We like larger. So while I've set what the minimum is, that in some degree the bigger the better. Our minimum has always been 3 chairs in a practice.
How much big stuff is out there compared to the smaller sweeping up still at this stage?
I think probably the total universe of practices that would fit those minimum criteria are probably about 2,500, 3,000 practices. Of those, I don't have a figure on how many are consolidated. I would say it's probably higher than the total percentage, but maybe you're looking at 40% consolidated. So still a lot to go at. Other criteria we look at as well, we like practices where it's already been run by more than one dentist. We often find that the transition from that to a corporate model is smoother. They already have a manager in place. They're already used to thinking about things like HR in the same way that we do. That helps a lot. But growth is a big focus for us as well. Is the physical envelope of the practice enough that we could add new surgeries? Has the practice already been managed to an optimum point of view? Does it have the full suite of possible services under the roof? That's something that we would develop and add growth. And that really helps us to justify paying kind of multiples that one has to pay for to buy these things.
We may come to multiples in a second. Looking at things like demographics obviously is part of what you would do analysing any acquisition. What about geography? Any no-go zones?
Yes, so the main criterion here is can we hire dentists? That's the first one.
Which suggests there are areas where you can't.
Yes.
And I could nudge you towards saying golden handshakes. Money will have changed hands in some of the more outlying areas?
Yes, both the NHS and private providers are paying upfront relocation amounts to individual dentists, up to £20,000 in the NHS case, to go and move into what are often called dental deserts. So that's often the coastal regions of the UK and less accessible ones. But for us, when we're looking for what we're really looking for, we're looking for generally medium-sized towns, market towns that have an older than average and wealthier than average demographic. That's really the sweet spot for us. And frequently we're looking to buy the best and largest practice in that kind of town, large catchment areas, low competitive intensity. Those are our ideal sites.
So you're not going to be on the extremes of the coast or in the Highlands of Scotland for obvious reasons?
No, I mean, number one, because we couldn't recruit, and number two, probably because there aren't enough of the kind of patients we're looking for.
Of course. And what about branding? So some dental corporates will focus on branded rollouts.
Yes.
But where you can, you try to keep the identity of the acquisitions you make, don't you?
We do in the UK. We believe very much that the UK patient trusts their dentists and has some sort of relationship to the location, but they are somewhat mistrustful of corporate healthcare in general. We feel like trust is at the centre of dentistry, and therefore our job is not to get in the way of those trusting relationships. In Ireland, we have a different strategy, and we brand a lot of our practices there, Dental Care Ireland, because we found, because that's in somewhat a less mature market, actually having a new site or a redeveloped site with corporate branding often is a reassurance to patients, as it is in a number of other continental European markets. And there we find that branding is actually helpful. But we still, even in Southern Ireland, we have some practices, premium practices, where we retain the original branding.
Do you have any eyes on any other geographies? Are you looking abroad, or is there a big enough market for you to tap where you are now?
I think diversification is very interesting in healthcare services and being in different markets. There's a lot of arguments for that. The flip side of that is that each market is unique and has its own pressures and its own culture, payer relationships, etc. So, and in previous lives in businesses that we've built across Europe, you really need a very high level of manager in each site. A lot of cost comes with setting that head office function up. So that's quite a big step to make.
And the wider your spread, the harder it is to manage, I guess.
Well, that's true, but again, put the accent on having very capable local management, as we have in Ireland.
From a investor lens, views on valuation multiples, on exits, etc. How's the market at the moment?
Market's a little bit more abundant at the moment, although there have been more transactions recently in Europe. The biggest provider in Spain has traded this year. My dentist, obviously the biggest of the groups in the UK, has traded, but at significantly lower multiples than we were seeing a few years ago for consolidators. At the same time, individual site multiples have not come down by as much. And I think we're being very circumspect at the UK right now. While we've always tried to balance internal and external growth, a lot of the attraction of external growth buying things is multiple arbitrage, and that's not really there today in the UK market in general. So really only attracted by very high growth potential sites in the UK until that mismatch is brought more into line.
Could I nudge you towards a figure for an average sized practice that you might buy, or anybody might buy in your market?
Yeah, I would say on a site level for the kind of practice that we want to buy, multiples currently are somewhere between 7 and 7.5 times EBITDA.
Now you've got substantial exposure to private dentistry. Obviously the NHS dental market is quite different and facing different challenges. It had a successful quiet period during COVID, and then post-COVID all the contracts came back to bite. What are the main headwinds and growth levers you think for private dental practice in the UK over the next, 3 to 5 years?
So I think the challenge obviously right now, I think we're seeing some lack of consumer confidence in the UK market. So we're seeing some deferral of treatment plans for more complex treatment, implants, crown bridges and things. However, the long-term drivers are still very, very positive. As it is in all the other the healthcare areas that you look at.
It doesn't change.
No, I mean, we've got an aging demographic. We've got perhaps somewhat different from some other sectors. From the baby boomers on, I think we're seeing people wanting to look good, not just be healthier, but look good for longer. and their smile is an important part of that. So whereas my grandmother would have been quite happy with her dentures and a glass at the side of her bed at night, my father, who's in his 90s, would have an implant. So I think there's an increasing complexity and customer knowledge, which is definitely driving demand and market growth. But also awareness, and I think this is particularly post-COVID, of the importance of health, the importance of oral health. And there's nothing like being denied something, as the UK patient was, in terms of access to dental care, to actually renew how important it is to people. So I think there's a lot of long-term drivers in terms of patient awareness, availability of new treatments and knowledge of those treatments, as well as those underlying demographics, which mean long-term growth is still very strong.
This isn't a question within your core remit, but NHS dentistry. I mean, I'm tempted to ask a bold question: does it even have a future? If that's one that you're not prepared to speculate on, and you may not be, then why don't you do more of it, or why is it an unattractive market from your perspective?
I think, it would be a very brave government who got rid of NHS dentistry. I think what future of NHS dentistry is a much bigger and more complex question, and I think we may need to redefine exactly what the offering is, given that we're only able currently to cater for 40 to 50% of the population. I think for us, the reason we moved away from it was really it's becoming less and less profitable every year. The current contract came in 2006. Has an increase in what's paid by the government in incremental amounts annually, but that hasn't kept pace with inflation, so there's less profit to be made there. But the bigger factor is dentists are less attracted by working in NHS dentistry to working in private dentistry, and ultimately, our business depends on having capable, motivated dentists to work with us, and that's much easier in private than it is in NHS.
Sure. I mean, we could have a whole session talking about recruitment and retention, etc., which I don't want this to be the focus of our discussion. But in a line or two, how is recruitment, how is retention, how are you coping in the current environment?
So recruitment's definitely easier for a private group than it is for an NHS group. I would say it's not easy, but it's easier than it's been. And we have a manageable level of turnover. But there is a real notable difference between the UK and Ireland, where we're able to tap into some of the very highly qualified dentists in continental Europe who want to work in an English-speaking environment, find it harder to come to the UK than they were pre-Brexit. They can go to Ireland and work, and we're pretty much fully recruited in Ireland.
Interesting. We touched on high-end services, implants, cosmetic dentistry. We've got rising consumer expectations across the board in all kinds of healthcare. How do you see the role of clinical innovation, patient experience, digital technology, etc., tapping into those things as you look at your forward plan for the business?
It's a big question. I mean, certainly what we've seen over the last 10 to 20 years in the UK is an increasing complexity of treatment, driven partly by patients becoming more aware of treatments, some of which aren't available on the NHS, like implants, or effectively not available, plus more dentists getting trained and getting more familiar with a broader range of services. So that's good. I think we're able to cater, rather than patients having missing teeth or whatever, they have a multitude of options now. And that's good. I think Ireland's been earlier in that adoption curve, but moving up very, very quickly. And that's been interesting to be a part of that.
UK's been behind on the implant curve. I know that I've spoken to, I won't name the groups, but a number of groups who were highly frustrated at the lack of progress that implants in particular were making in the UK.
I mean, if you compare the penetration of implants here to Sweden or Italy, we're a long, long way behind. And in fact, most countries in Europe would be behind in terms of where the treatment was appropriate, what percentage of patients got it.
Is that simply cost, or what's the factor?
No, I think the biggest single factor would just be, well, don't forget, until quite recently, NHS was the main provider of dental care in the UK. And while the NHS offering does cover all clinical need, that typically has not included implants historically. So dentists weren't getting trained to place implants or to restore implants, and patients weren't aware of that as a treatment option. But as private dentistry has grown, more dentists are trained to do that, and patients are more aware and more likely to ask for it as well.
If it's not promoted or offered, it's very unlikely to be a choice that patients are making.
Yeah, and it's a big obligation to the dentist to provide a range of treatment choices to their patient and advise them on what they should choose.
Any new technologies on the horizon?
So, I think one of the fortunate positions for dentistry is AI is going to be very much an enabler for us rather than a threat. We're already seeing it built into new diagnostic equipment, for example, which again is allowing more information provision to patients. They're more easily able to visualize what their mouth looks like and what it could look like.
If you show them the before and after before they've had it,
exactly,
you can win them over.
Well, exactly, and plus it allows them to make a more informed decision,
sure.
which is good. So certainly diagnostics, it's already there, and really the technology is improving very, very rapidly. We're also looking at it in terms of, and this is common in lots of other areas of healthcare, in terms of note-taking, correspondence, major improvements in productivity.
Even simple things. I'm reminded of a chat that I had with my dentist about automated appointment systems.
Yes.
And just getting the workflow correct.
Absolutely, and so software has already been a big enabler, but where I think AI can play a role, particularly, as I say, is if you record the patient visit, the AI can prepare the notes from that, obviously to be checked by the dentist and approved by the dentist. But then also, I've got one specialist dentist who takes referral from other dentists. He reckons AI is already saving about an hour a day because it's able to do that plus the correspondence back to the referring dentist. So I think we could see significant productivity gains in the near future.
Interesting. We mentioned labs very briefly. So you've got your own dental labs. How do those non-practice assets, if I can describe them as that, fit into the general plan? Why do you have them? Where's the benefit? Would you recommend them to others?
So we got into labs because we saw a very attractive lab and we believed it would be, on a standalone basis, an interesting investment. We thought we understood its end market well because it was the kind of practices that we own, and we've only ever bought labs that are very much consistent with our strategy in the practices. The reason we didn't buy them was to internalize margin and force our dentists to use our labs. We very much believe in clinical freedom, and our dentists are free to choose whichever labs they want to use.
Because when you partner with a group, they've got long-standing relationships with the people that they've bought from for years, and trust.
Absolutely, and that trust, again, we come back to that word, it's very important generally in dentistry and dentists. They see their lab technician almost as part of their clinical team. They prepare the tooth that they're going to fit and satisfy the needs of the patient. So it was because we thought it was an attractive investment, which is proven to be. We've bought others that we think, again, fit with that mould, and we now have a group that's of 5 that we're integrating more together and working as a group, servicing our different varied dentists across the country. A number of our dentists do choose to use our labs, and I think they benefit from the enhanced communication relationships being part of the same family of businesses. And as I say, we see good growth opportunities. Again, there's a lot of technology change in labbing, much more than actually in clinical practice. That's the threats and opportunities from that. There's a lot of consolidation going on right now within labs, but again, as within private dentistry, it's quite a segmented market, and not all labs are the same.
Looking at practice sellers, partnering with a group like yours, selling, what are the key alignment issues? Clinical autonomy, culture, governance. Basically, what mistakes do you see operators making when they're looking to partner up?
I think that the word culture is probably the most important that you use. I think the biggest mistake is choosing to work with a group that doesn't have an aligned culture.
How do you test that beforehand?
I think you've got to spend time with the people, not just the people perhaps from the business development team of that acquirer, but actually the operating team, actually try and get under the skin of how they're going to operate the practice going forward. The best way to do that obviously is to speak to other dentists that have already sold to that group, and we push referencing very hard when we're talking to people that we want to work with us. But we've found generally a very good alignment between those practices we want to buy and those that want to sell to us and have a successful relationship with us. And I think for us, often the key is how invested, not just financially, but emotionally in the practice is that clinician. Do they use words like describing it as their baby or their legacy? Those are the ones that have really made sure that things work extremely well in their practice, and that practice.
That's a green flag for you.
That's a really strong green flag for
But they
us.
may be reluctant to let go in those circumstances.
Yeah, but also they're very conscious of wanting that baby, that legacy, to be handled correctly and nurtured going forward. And often people are looking to us not just to give them a long-term retirement plan, but also to help that practice get to the next level. They've probably owned it for 20 years. They spent 15 of that working very hard to build it. Last 5, they've probably getting to a stage of life, a little bit less energy, maybe less capital to invest, and they're looking for us to come in and re-dynamize the practice. And they're very supportive of us doing that. We try to ensure that the culture of the practice remains the same. Again, we want the patient's experience to be unchanged when they come into the practice. So there's a lot of things that we're not changing when we buy a practice, and the things that we do are generally not the things that the principals are highly invested in.
And I guess that would mean that the Gensmile experience isn't the same depending on the practice you go to, because you allow individuality.
I think
is that a benefit
that's
or
true
a problem?
for the patient. I mean, obviously there is some commonality in terms of high quality care, a team that's looking after them, caring about them, and being highly ethical, thinking about the patient, the long-term care of that patient, not just trying to monetize as much from that one individual appointment as possible. So there's a lot of commonality.
And how do you, forgive me, how do you police that? Police isn't the right word. How do you check on that? How do you maintain quality standards?
So obviously we have a management structure, we have processes in place to try and monitor that. But at the same time, there's a lot of onus on us when we're buying practices, again, to try and buy high quality practices that are well run, that have the right culture. And I think inculcating that culture, continuing that culture of caring and looking after our patients well is the strongest, because you can't be looking over everybody's shoulder all the time. But if they bought into that culture and they're part of that culture, that's the best assurance that we can have. But of course we do all the quality control things that anyone would expect us to do. Due
diligence matters beforehand. And sitting in Candesic, I'm pleased to hear that, but it's important to get it right before you go in.
Yeah, and also we're also very carefully monitoring feedback from our patients. We're very proud of the fact we have an NPS score of 92. Which means that our patients are very happy generally with the experience they're having. But where they're unhappy, then that clearly is something we jump on very strongly.
And there will have been occasions then, presumably, when on the books a business looks good, but you've gone and had a chat, you've got cold feet for whatever reason, it hasn't felt right, and you have turned down a deal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And it's much better not to buy something if you have concerns, rather than buying something where there's risk it's not going to work.
And you're in a good position of not needing to do that now.
Yeah, I mean, our ownership structure is such that because it's privately owned, we don't have any issues of velocity of capital, having to deploy a certain amount of money each year. People have always asked me, how many practices do you want to buy a year? And my response was, well, I could say 5, but if I see 7 great ones, I should buy 7. If I see none, I should buy none. And that's been our experience. There's been years when we bought 10 practices and other years when we bought none.
And I should have asked really earlier, how are you funded?
So we've been funded through private capital from myself and my co-founder. And we have very strong and very healthy relationships with a couple of high street banks that support us very well as well.
Looking at the next couple of years, strategic priorities for the business, what are you looking at? Organic growth, pipeline acquisition, margin improvement, etc. What's the focus?
Yeah, I mean, organic growth, I think, has always been one of our top priorities and certainly remains, and that's how you create real value. So continue. And the growth in the UK the last couple of years has not been as strong as it has been historically. Historically, we've generally had a 7 to 8% organic growth, like for like, every year. We've fallen off from that. We need to get back to that. We have very strong organic growth, however, in Ireland, and we need to continue that. Inflation has hurt us, as it's hurt many, many business. We have lost some site level margin because of that, and we need to try and recoup that over that period as well.
I'm hesitating to ask the next question slightly, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I know from conversations outside of this room, you and I are of a similar age, and which I'm not going to comment on. And I'm very aware that I have less years working ahead than I've had behind me, and I've looked at my pension. What is the big game plan, or what are you prepared to say about the big game plan? You could be continuing to build an empire and very happy doing that, or you might have half an eye on an exit, and I'm expecting a politician's response.
Well, my youngest daughter's 13, so I've certainly got lots of motivation to keep working. Personally, I can't see myself ever fully retiring, so I'm not looking to run off to a beach anytime soon. Still enjoying running this business, and I see lots of opportunity for it going forward. So I certainly expect to be continuing to run it for the foreseeable future.
Fantastic. We've whipped through the questions, so I'm going to throw another couple of questions at you. I'm interested in private dental insurance uptake and what you were doing to capture that market in particular. What's your view on that, and what are you doing to attract people in?
So PMI is much more important for us in Ireland than it is in the UK. There, as you'll know, that is even in GP services is largely a self-pay market. People there are much more used to self-pay, and we see very strong growth in the dental insurance market there. We're cultivating very strong relationships with the three main providers. We're the only national group in Ireland, so have a unique offering in terms of what we can give members of insurance companies. In the UK, we're much more focused around the plan part of insurance. Obviously, there are different types of plans, but some of the care plans are effectively an insurance type product where you're paying a monthly fee and get all but specialist care covered by
What's growth like in that area?
So for us, it's not strong, but it's extremely sticky and a very stable foundation for us. Where generally in the plan market, there's been a lot of growth in the last few years post-COVID is in dental conversions from NHS to private. It's often seen as an easier sell or an ability to help patients make that transition, that they can quantify how much it's going to cost them.
And there are some groups who have, and I was criticised for saying this once, an easy jet style of offering, a more affordable offering for some of their patients. Is that something that Gensmile looks at? Do you have a tiered system? Would you consider a tiered system, or is it you're in or you're out?
I think even where we offer NHS, all our patients get very similar levels of care, and we don't really differentiate. We try to give the best op care possible to all of our patients.
Have you considered a more budget offering, or?
It's not really something that would fit into most of our practices. And again, as I say, for us as an organisation, I don't see us as offering lesser care to any of our patients.
Looking at preventative care, perhaps, which is big in all walks of healthcare these days, increasingly, and it should be more so, of course. Where do you stand on that? Is there a market for you developing increasing preventative treatments? And are people interested in that? And is it in your interests to do that? Is there more money in treating than preventing?
I mean, one of the ways I describe our practices is preventative-based family practices. It's an essential part of what we do.
It's good for retention. And long-term value, presumably, is far enhanced by that.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, our business is not to maximise the income from an individual patient visit. It's to look after that patient in the long term. And to ensure their general health. I mean, but it isn't just about purely oral health either. I mean, all our patients when they come in, I mean, it is oral health, but they're screened for oral cancer every time they come in. We're looking for markers of diabetes. So it's already a big part of what we do. And a lot of our patients will be very well maintained and not need any aggressive treatment for many years. I do, however, think that we are going to increasingly look at the holistic view of the patient. I have slight hesitation to use that word because I think it has different connotations to different people. But trying to position oral health care in the context of a patient's overall health, I think is an important part of what we already do, but maybe what we'll do more of, or at least communicate more to our patients going forward. I think we're often not very good as a profession at communicating to patients how important it is that they come regularly to their dentist for that overall health impact, not just whether their teeth hurt or not.
Or they come in when there's a problem. Do you find that the patients are increasingly savvy and aware, or is that a difficult battle to win then?
I think, as I say, I think post-COVID, people are generally more aware of their health. And I do generally think there's the long-term trend of patients becoming more aware of their treatment options and the importance of good oral health care. So I think that is true, but I think there's a lot more we could do to improve it further. We do oral health education in some schools. I think that's very important. Again, there's more to be done by us, by the profession, by the country that would be helpful.
So we've whipped through a load of questions. You've given very detailed answers. We're now at the quickfire round.
Very good. Okay.
So I'm going to fire some questions at you in one sentence or less.
Okay.
Nobody has ever managed to do this with just one sentence. I'm going to fire some questions at you.
Okay.
Tell me what comes into your head. So what's the one metric that you check first thing every week?
First thing would be sales versus budget for the preceding week, allied with our white space for that week in terms of how we filled the diaries. The other key, probably the most important key metric for us though, is revenue per hour. When we're looking at this often has to be a very granular analysis, looking at what individual clinicians are doing.
Revenue per hour per dentist.
Yeah, and per individual, yeah.
Is that a confidential figure, or can you give me a ballpark for what might be expected?
It ranges quite considerably.
By geography and seniority, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to be between £200 and £400 an hour.
If you could wave a magic wand to fix one challenge in UK dentistry, what would it be?
I think although we are very focused on private dentistry, it is shocking that you're seeing headlines of people having to take their own teeth out. So I think broader access would be, if I could wish one thing for the country. Well, we tried to support that. So we have donated a mobile dental unit, which is a big van with a surgery in the back, to Dentaid, which is a UK charity that works both in the UK and abroad, serving underserved populations in the UK. So both poor and other underserved populations, and I think that's us trying to give a little bit back. But improving access would be the number one thing.
That comes with a price, and you look at the government for that, presumably.
Yes.
Common misconception investors have about dental groups.
That they're all the same, I think, would be the most common. There's a big variety in how different groups work. People talk about private dentistry. NHS is obviously largely monolithic, but when they're talking about private, they sort of regard it as all being the same when it's not. There's a big difference between the kinds of practices that we own and run and others that are focused much more on cosmetic high street dentistry. And this is not critical at all of them, it's just a different business to what we do. So I think that seeing all as the same is probably the biggest failing.
Book, podcast or person that has most influenced how you lead? Where do you get your inspiration from?
Well, I've had some very good you didn't want to mention the ages earlier, but I'm 58. By some counts, this is my 6th career. I've had some very good mentors along the way, and I've managed to observe some very good leaders. And I would have to pay credit to each of them. In terms of,
do you want to name check any of them, or?
I think my business partner Nick Lowcock has been. We've worked together for off and on for over 20 years. He brought me into private equity in the first place. I'd certainly credit him with a lot of the more analytical approach to management, and making the ability to make decisions in a timely but informed way, which I think is important. I think some is innate, in terms of how you deal with people. But I would also credit some of my very early bosses when I was working in consultancy myself, in terms of how to deal with people. That was very helpful. if you'd asked me that question 30 years ago, I'd have probably come out with someone like Sun Tzu, because I was working in Asia and like to quote him. I think there are good lessons, in many places.
And if I said, and I'll phrase this two ways so it's easy to answer, the best piece of business advice that you've got, or spin that, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to somebody in their 20s looking to be the entrepreneur that you've been?
I think there's an awful lot of young people out there who are very keen to start businesses and being entrepreneurs, and I think that's fantastic. At the same time, I think you've got to find the right business. You've got to look at the opportunity. I think
head or heart, or both.
I think you've got to have both. I think Charlie Munger said you should never sell a product you don't believe in. So the heart's got to be there, but the head has got to analyse the opportunity.
You need the figures to back it up as well.
You need to do the diligence. I mean, it shocks, and one of the things that shocks and depresses me more than anything else is when people start businesses and it flops very quickly, because they clearly haven't done that diligence and that work to see if the opportunity is really there. And I think the single biggest piece of advice, or two, I would think, of things I've learned and perhaps has been renewed to me during this tenure. One is that everything should be needs driven. So look at, is the need really there? And if you're trying to cater to a specific need, that's much better than saying, I've got this widget, I've got this solution, right, let's go looking for a problem. That fails. And then the other bit would be the importance of culture in an organisation and building that from day one. That's absolutely vital.
I'm going to pull you back to my one sentence direction that I gave you earlier, which we've ignored, and I knew that we would. In one sentence, what's your vision for the future of Gensmile? Final question.
I want us to continue to be one of the leaders in the industry. I think we want us to be recognised as the highest quality and most ethical.
You want to be the biggest and the best?
No, best is a subjective term, right? I think the highest quality and most ethical would probably be the two criteria I'd put as being most important.
It's a grand answer. Simon, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.